I'm Matt Shoemaker. Welcome to Tech Forum. Today I wanted to discuss living with an EV. This is not a Tesla Model 3 video necessarily. It's just some of the dynamics of living with an electric vehicle versus a gas vehicle. And there are some specific differences that may not be super apparent on the front end. First thing I'd like to address is range anxiety. Range anxiety is an interesting topic. For those of you that don't know what range anxiety is just the anxiety you have related to the range that you've got. And this is something that for years people have been concerned about with electric vehicles, primarily because of the infrastructure. You can't just stop at any corner and gain more range like you can with a gas car. With a gas car, if you're running low on fuel, you merely stop at a local gas station and fill up the car and you go on your way. With an electric vehicle, you have to be at home to charge or find a charging station. There are very few charging stations, or there were historically very few up until recently, and it took a lot longer to charge up a car than to gas up. So it may take a couple hours to charge a car in the past, in the early days of electric vehicles, whereas you can gas up a car in 5 minutes. Add to that the issue of overall charge capacity in the batteries. So in years gone by, most electric vehicles were only good for between 70 and maybe 110 miles on a charge, 110 miles at the most, typically 70, 80, or 90 miles. And so you have very limited driving distance on a charge, very few charging stations, and even if you can find a charging station, it takes hours to charge the car. So this is what has held electric vehicles back. And however, now that is changing, and I think Tesla is one of the ones that's at the forefront of this. So this particular car is rated at 310 miles of driving range on a full charge. That definitely is conservative. In my style of driving, it would be more like 340. So you have nearly as much range on a charge as you would distance on a full tank of gas. Add to that, Tesla has their own rapid charging network, and there are other public rapid charging networks, fast DC charging networks for other non-Tesla vehicles. Still not as many as gasoline cars, but they're popping up here and there. So that brings me back to range anxiety. Living with this particular car, when I first got it, I was worried that range anxiety would be a thing for me. Turns out that the first few days it was. I'm not going to lie to you. It definitely was a concern. I'd get in the car and I'd look at my state of charge meter, and I charged it to 80% this morning. I left with roughly 250 miles of range, and I would stare at that range indicator and worry about it all day long until I realized I drive 140 to 160 miles a day. I had one day that I drove 240 miles, and I knew that was going to happen, so I charged to 90% rather than 80%. But it did bother me at first, just because I had been pre-programmed or trained by the media to worry about range and to have range anxiety. Well, eventually the range anxiety went away. It took a few days, maybe a week at the most, and the range anxiety went away. Add to that the fact that one principle hadn't even come to mind until I owned my own EV, and that is that there's actually the reverse is true. When you have a long-range EV, such as a Tesla or maybe a Chevy Bolt, also a very good long-range electric vehicle, and there are others that are coming out. But when you have a longer-range electric vehicle, not only does range anxiety not exist, I have found that actually the reverse is true. When I was using my gasoline car, which was a Ford C-Max hybrid, And that car was good for anywhere from 550 to maybe as much as 700 miles on a tank, depending on how I drove it, but typically in the 600-mile range on a tank of gas. Even though I only had to gas up every handful of days or so, I found myself stressing out over running out of gas. I'd leave for the day, not realizing that or not remembering that from the day before I was down to 1/8 of a tank or whatever, and I'd leave and look at my gas gauge and, oh my goodness, I need gas. And then I had to worry about, all right, I got to pull over somewhere and get gas. And it was a constant stressor for me because it's something that I had to do while I was out and about. And for me, as I mentioned in my introduction video, I use my car primarily for visiting clients for my business. And stopping for gas along the road, there were a couple problems with that. First off, making appointments on time is critical to me. So I didn't want to be 6 or 7 minutes late by, hunting down a gas station and pulling in and gassing up and paying and all that. Occasionally end up smelling a little bit like gas. Usually not, but it can happen. And just the whole dynamics of sometimes I'm sort of out in the country where there aren't any near gas stations, or I get to a gas station, and believe it or not, here in Northern Illinois, there are quite a few gas stations that only accept cash. So I get there and realize all I have is my debit card. They won't take cash. I mean, I've had a number of nightmare occurrences over the years, gassing up and having it kind of mess with my day. So with an electric vehicle, that's actually completely mitigated in that when you get home, you plug the car in. Every morning, I have a full charge, or as full as I've programmed the car to charge to. In my case, that's 80%. So I consider 80% a full charge because that's what I normally charge it to each day. So I wake up each morning with my full charge, 80%, and I go about my day. I never think about it. And so that flies in the face of all of the concerns that people have over range anxiety, because again, the reverse is actually true. Now when I take out one of the gasoline cars, I get in it, the first thing I do is look at the gas gauge and roll my eyes. All right, I gotta go get gas. It's annoying because I can't do it at home. If I could gas my cars up at home, this would be a different story. But I can't gas up at home, so I have to find a gas station, stop there. So kind of a pain. And plus the fact that I'm putting $30 or $40 of gas in just makes my heart sink. Rather than with this car, charging it up only costs, I don't know, $2.50 or $3, whatever it is. It's just a few dollars. It's not $30 or $40. It's radically cheaper. And so there's that. Another thing is that you don't really realize it at first, but you don't have to warm the car up. Now with my hybrid, I would get in it and push the start button, and the engine didn't always start. It depended on the state of charge of the battery and the temperature of the battery and the ambient air temperature. I would say half the time I got in and pushed the start button, the engine would start. And so half the time I would get in and it would start off on EV. But even if it started off on EV mode, when the engine started, it had to warm up. So I really didn't have any acceleration power available because the hybrid system was warming the car up for me. And it was just kind of weird getting the engine warmed up. And with any non-hybrid, you obviously have to start the car, let it warm up. You don't get any cabin heat right away. Your gas mileage is in the toilet for the first couple miles because the engine's running rich. And it's just kind of a strange thing to have to warm up a car, or at least it seems to me now that I have an EV. With this, I get in and I just go. I don't think about it. I turn the seat heat on right away. The seats heat right away. If the weather's cool out, it still takes a couple minutes for cabin heat to turn on, but the seat heat comes on almost immediately. It's just a lot less, there's a lot less involved in getting in an EV and driving. Also, I was concerned when I bought this car that every day having to plug the car in was going to be a pain. Yeah, a couple times a week I'd have to stop for gas, but that's only a couple times a week. And I thought, with an EV, I have to plug it in every day. First off, I don't have to plug it in every day, but I choose to, just so I have a relatively full charge each morning when I start my day. But number two, it's really not, I leave my charge cord coiled up and laying on my driveway at home, and so I back in the driveway, I get out of the car, I grab the charge cord and plug it in, walk in the house. Very simple. When I get up in the morning, I unplug it, lay it down in the driveway, and I leave. It's so simple. It's like plugging in your cell phone. So the mindset that it's a hassle to have to plug in every day, I've not found that to be the case. Also, there's a principle I've heard people talk about with EVs, the ABCs, which is always be charging. Now, I have a 240 volt charger at home, and I can get about 30 miles of driving range for every hour the car's plugged in. So, you know, if I drive 80 miles and then stop at home for lunch and plug in, I'm at home for an hour, I'm going to get about half of that range back, or close to it, just being plugged in, eating. Go back out and I have more range again. It's a simple thing. I don't really need to charge it that much. But even if you only have a 120 volt outlet to charge an electric car, that still can work, because if you apply that ABC principle, which is always be charging, you run a couple errands, 25 miles or whatever, and then you get home, you plug in, and you go out, you run a couple more errands an hour or two later, you come home, you plug in. If you're always plugged in on 120 volt outlet, then the car's going to be fine. That becomes less convenient though, because you're plugging and unplugging every time you get in and out of the car. For me, I just plug it in at the end of the day, unplug it in the morning, that's it, for most days anyway. And because I've got that 220 volt, 240 volt charger. So that's part of it. Another aspect of driving an EV every day is just they're easier to drive. Even an automatic transmission car, you've got, you don't realize it until after you get away from it for a while, but the shifting actually adds a little bit of, I don't want to say burden, but it changes the dynamic of the drive. You also will modulate the gas pedal based on the way you know the engine's going to perform. My wife does the same thing, even though she's not a car person. You adapt your driving style to the way a gasoline engine performs. And all of that disappears with an EV. You don't even think about it. You get in, you push the gas pedal, it makes the car move forward, or the accelerator pedal makes the car move forward. You don't really think about anything going on with the electric motor, because an electric motor is different than a gas engine, and it's an easier, like I said before, the dynamic there is simpler to live with. Also, driving an EV is it's a different experience. I guess you'd say public interaction. EVs are still rare. They're still less than 1% of the cars on the road. So get into a parking lot and talk to people. I'd say 1 time out of every 4 that I park the car, somebody asks about it. Whether they know it's a Model 3 or not, whether they know it's a Tesla or not, it seems like everybody knows it's an electric car. So I get out and someone will walk up to me and ask about it. And initially I thought that was going to be kind of a pain in the neck, but really it's not. It's kind of fun. As a sidebar to all of this, when I got the car, I was a little bit worried about so many people asking me questions about it, until I realized something. All of the interesting internal combustion engine cars that I've owned in the past, that I've had what I would call dumb questions, for lack of a better word, but just annoying people, bothering me. All of those occurrences happened at gas stations. Not sure why that is, but when you're at a gas station and you have an interesting car, even my little Honda Civic Si, it's not a rare car by any stretch, but it is kind of a neat car. It's visually aggressive looking, and when I stop at gas stations, about half the time somebody asks me about it. And I'm inviting as a personality, and I'll talk, but I get a lot of really dumb questions at gas stations. And but in parking lots, I don't get those questions. Well, with an EV, you're never at gas stations. And again, I go back to, I don't know why this is, but people that ask questions at gas stations tend to ask really annoying or dumb questions. And you know, questions like, well, what do you do for a living to afford that? And just annoying questions. But when you're in a parking lot at a department store or whatever, and somebody that asks you a question, they're generally asking you a really good question, like, how do you like that car? Oh, I love it. So you charge it at home then, right? Oh yeah, I have a charging outlet in my garage that I have set up for fast charging. And oh really, how long does it take to charge? You know, they ask good, what I would consider somewhat educated questions, or truly intuitive questions, not dumb, intrusive questions like, what do you do for a living, and this kind of thing. So that's another benefit to having an EV, is avoiding those odd gas station situations. Also, I just don't like the gas station experience, I'll be honest with you. There are some nice gas stations around where I live, but there are some real dive gas stations. So you avoid all of that. Oil changes, which may not seem like a big deal. For me, it's a very, very big deal because of the amount of miles that I drive. So at this point, I would have normally already gotten two oil changes on a gasoline car in the miles I've put on this. And those 2 oil changes would have cost me, whatever, depending on where I went, anywhere from $30 to $45 per oil change. Plus I use my company for business, or my car, excuse me, I use my car for company business, and it's about an hour of wasted time per oil change between, you know, making a special trip and the time waiting to get it done and whatever. So I would have had 2 oil change expenses and 2 1-hour blocks of time wasted from my schedule in getting those oil changes done, and yet I haven't had to do that with this car. So you lose a lot of the frustration involved in owning a gas car when you're driving an EV. So those are some thoughts. As I come up with more thoughts, I'll give another update video. But for now, I wanted to give you guys just a little snippet of what it's like to live with an EV day to day. It's actually a nice experience. At first, you don't really notice much difference, but over time, you begin to recognize things that you hadn't really considered in the past. So again, thanks for tuning into Tech Forum, and I'm probably going to be doing many more videos, or more frequent videos, over the coming months, not only on this car, but on my SI that I've mentioned in my videos. We also have a Ford Fusion all-wheel drive that I'm going to do a thorough, comprehensive review of. That's a fantastic car. One of my favorite cars we've ever owned. And I also have some interesting project videos in my workshop that I've recently completed and am nearing completion of. So I'll be getting back to my my technical videos as well. Have a couple satire videos coming up that should be a lot of fun. So make sure you go ahead and click the link below to subscribe. And you guys have a wonderful day.